Whether you're a chestnut farmer, a food lover, or simply curious about this versatile nut, branching out with United Chestnuts is your guide to a thriving chestnut community. So join us as we explore the many branches of the chestnut tree, uncover the untold stories, and branching out together towards a sustainable future.
Thanks for joining in the Branching Out podcast. Today's guest is Tom Wahl of Red Fern Farm. Tom and his wife Kathy have been chestnut industry leaders for quite some time. They have orchards, but they also raise and sell a variety of trees. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. Well, Tom, thank you for joining me today on the United Chestnuts Community Podcast. We're actually recording this at the Chestnut Growers of America Tri-Nut gathering filled with people just loving different kinds of nuts. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's just start off with, how many years have you been active in the chestnut business?
Now, I planted my first chestnut tree in 1990. My first big planting in 92. And then another one in 97. Another in 2001, and several times since then. So I have trees that are 31, 32 years old, all the way down to just recently sprouted from seed.
Yeah, I put a post out the other day just encouraging people that it's just a-okay to plant trees in, year after year or every several years, like to kind of stagger it.
Yep.
That's kind of what you've done. What did you do before Red Fern Farm?
Well, immediately before, I was a combination wildlife biologist, forester, and park ranger for a county conservation board
So the
agency.
It's been in your blood for a long time, huh?
Yeah.
What do you think is the most rewarding part of this business for you and for Kathy?
Well, I just like being out under the trees and not indoors, not in the office. But it's kind of the culmination of decades of work. And our goal when we set off long ago was to show how agriculture can be practiced and that a farm family can make a good living on just a few acres without soil erosion and toxic chemicals and heavy dependence on fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, you were a pioneer at that time as far as the chestnut industry, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there weren't very many of us back then.
Yeah. So you've learned a lot, probably from trial and error.
Yep, a lot more error than trial. Yeah. I used to say and used to think that we've made all the mistakes, but just recently I found out people are making mistakes that never would have occurred to me.
Yeah, okay, so it's, sometimes you come out on the winning side of trying different things, and, just at this gathering that we're at, 350 people, I think I heard. There, it's some from the hazelnut and the walnut, but also the chestnut group. That's tremendous interest in this industry.
Yeah, and especially in the chestnuts, interest has absolutely exploded in the last few years.
Yeah. Okay, that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you about. So you kind of said that the ages of your trees anywhere from 30-ish, 32, all the way up to some newer trees.
Yeah, some of them haven't even gotten into the ground yet.
Yes. Well, part of the conference we've been talking about the spacing. So tell me your perspective on the spacing, what you've done and what's worked and what you recommend at this point.
Well, clear back 30 years ago, I recommended 20 by 20 spacing to start, but with the understanding that they'll need to be thinned by the time they're 20 years old, and then to 40 by 40, and then they'll need another thinning to spacing of 80 by 80, probably around year 50 to 60.
Yeah.
And then probably somewhere around year 500 to 600, they'll need another thinning down to 160 by 160, and then that spacing should be good for another 500 to 1,000 years.
Yeah, isn't that something? And that's what we're seeing in Europe, right? Some of the
Yeah,
trees that are
yeah,
old.
they're trees way over 1,000 years old, still producing tremendous quantities of nuts,
It's just
and covering a single tree could cover acres.
yeah. Okay, another subject that I know you're passionate about is the difference of having trees in your orchard that have been grafted versus seedlings.
Yes.
And I'm going to put a link in this piece to a nice paper that you wrote, but kind of what you're feeling on it.
If we're talking about Chinese chestnut, which is really the only species that is suited to this part of the world, uh, um, the grafted trees underperform compared to seedling trees. And in contrast, the seedling trees perform much better than their grafted parents. They produce nuts just as high in quality and just as big or bigger than their grafted parents. And due to several issues, the grafted trees just don't perform as well as seedlings. And that applies only to Chinese chestnuts, not to any other species. The difference gets bigger the farther north you go, and the farther south you go, the grafted trees can approach but never quite equal seedlings. But in the far north, the production difference between a grafted tree and a seedling tree, at least at our location, is 500 to 600% difference. And that's a big enough difference that one way will lead to bankruptcy and the other to high profitability.
Very important for people that are just researching this business or just starting out to really consider,
Yes. And this is a situation where it's for people starting out and wanting good advice on that. They should seek out people who have actually been doing it for a while, and don't go to universities for that kind of information because it's not there.
Yes. Now you offer consulting services, is that right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, for the last 30 years, I've been getting lots and lots of calls, phone calls and visits, and it's reached the point where if I don't charge for the services, I don't have any spare time. And by charging consulting services, it reduces the number of calls to just about what I'd like to handle.
Yes, correct. And I read somewhere, which this just makes common sense, but it's good for prospective people calling you to do some of their own research, so that
Yes.
they are ready with some questions. And I can speak. We haven't called you yet. Maybe we will, but a good friend of ours did, and it just helped him validate what he had, the research that he had done. So
yeah, and when somebody calls me, I usually tell them, okay, you should read this and this and this and look at these websites and then call me back and then I'll give you some consultation.
Absolutely.
Because then they can ask better questions.
Yes, and just being here at this group where there's so many other growers, I encourage everyone to consider joining the Chestnut Growers of America. I'm also on the board of the Midwest Chestnut Producers Council. They're in Michigan area. So for people that is just go out to where the other growers are and learn from them, and then call you. So this is kind of a big question, but if you could just touch on it. A lot of people are asking about the revenue potential. There's all kinds of stuff on the internet of, it's a very profitable business. We know, Brad and I, being in this 7 to 8 years, it has the potential to be profitable, but it's also, there's some solid front end cost and a lot of work.
Yes.
So what can you say about the revenue potential?
Well, I've been telling people, especially when I'm talking to farmers and speaking to them in terms that they can relate to, I tell them that on a good site and with good management, mature chestnut trees can produce up to 100 bushels per acre and then sell for $165 a bushel or more.
Yeah.
And that gets their attention.
Yes, absolutely.
And then I tell them that if they put pawpaws under their chestnuts, they can add another $8K per acre.
Yes.
To the value of their harvest.
Do you see farmers, removing some crops to plant chestnuts and or pawpaws?
No, I've never seen that
Not
happen.
yet.
No.
I know that there's some organizations out there looking to push that, to create more biodiversity.
I can say I've seen cases where a landowner who rented his land out to corn and soybean farmers took some of that land out from the rent and put chestnuts on them. But I don't know of any farmers who'd have actually taken farmland out of corn and soybean production just to plant chestnuts, except for my neighbor 32 years ago, right across the road from me. I talked into planting chestnuts on land that had been in corn and soybeans.
And how's that? Is that still there?
It's still there.
Yeah.
He ended up selling it to me 10 years later.
Okay, well that was a smart
move. And that's the first commercial chestnut planting in the state of Iowa.
Wow. Okay. Let's talk about distribution of the chestnuts. So you primarily just have a U-pick operation instead of any other type of.
Oh, yes. Virtually 100% of our chestnut sales are through U-pick, and also all the other crops we grow are marketed through U-pick, and that's by far the most profitable way to do it, because it eliminates or at least dramatically reduces costs of harvesting, sorting, sanitation, refrigeration, packaging, shipping, and advertising. Yeah. And when all of those are profit suckers, so when you eliminate all those, the only thing left is profit.
Yes, and there's a rumor that what you do right now is cut the grass and collect the checks.
Yeah, that's.
There's a little bit more to it.
Yeah, there's more to it than that, but those are the two big jobs are mowing the grass before the nuts start falling, and then driving to the bank.
Yes. Good business model.
The chestnut industry is quickly growing in the U.S. We encourage participation in organizations like the Chestnut Growers of America, the Midwest Chestnut Producers Council, and the Northern Nut Growers Association. Reach out to info@unitedchestnuts.com for help getting connected. And now, back to branching out.
So how far do you think people travel to do the U-pick operation?
Of our customers, probably the majority of them are traveling around 130 to 150 miles.
Okay.
One way. And most of them, probably 3/4 of our customers come from within Iowa, but about 1/4 of them are coming from places as far away as Milwaukee, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, Omaha,
wow,
Sioux City, Fargo, North Dakota, and Minneapolis. And the record holder so far is we had a family drive all the way up to our farm from South Florida, 1,200 miles one way to pick chestnuts.
So do you have a bed and breakfast?
No, we don't.
Huh. Very interesting. Do you have any kind of like liability insurance or anything?
Yes, we are insured.
Smart thing.
We checked with our insurance agent shortly after we started doing the U-pick, and he said we're covered until our revenue from the U-pick exceeds $100,000, and then he would have to add an additional endorsement that would cost another $8 a year.
Okay, so you're in good shape.
Yes.
So people like Brad and I, we're newer in this industry. Our trees are 7 to 8 years old, starting to produce, but there's just so much conversation about the growth of the industry. And so I just wanted to know, what is your perspective on what you're seeing as far as new growers and just the direction of the industry? It seems like it's super positive.
Okay. Well, up until recently, the number of additional chestnut acres going in North America has been held steady at right around 100 acres per year.
Okay.
So in 1980, there was approximately 0 acres of chestnuts, and in 2020 there was approximately 4,000
That tells you something
acres
right
of
there, doesn't
chestnuts.
it? Yes.
I think the rate of planting is going up dramatically now, but up until then, I did some calculations based on the demand for chestnuts and how fast new trees were being planted, and I calculated that back in the year 2000 anyway, I calculated that if demand for chestnuts remained perfectly flat, from then on, it would still take 285 years before we had enough trees in the ground to meet the demand that we had back in the year 2000. But the reality is, demand for chestnuts has been doubling about every 10 years.
Absolutely.
So the demand is going up much faster than the trees are being planted.
Yeah.
So the gap between supply and demand is widening, not narrowing.
Yes. It's an infant industry, even though there's a lot of growers here that are super excited about it and working hard every day, it's still just a baby industry.
Yeah.
I was talking to Roger Blackwell, president of Chestnut Growers of America, about it, and I was asking about lobbying in Washington for funds and everything to help the industry grow, and he said we're just too small, just need more growers. So more things to get busy keep doing that.
Yeah, and personally, I would rather the government just stop subsidizing things that people should never have done in the first place and get out of the way and let them do things they should be doing rather than asking them for money.
Yeah, let's be farmers, well, there's a sustainability benefit of planting trees, which makes us happy for grandkids and so forth, that all of us are putting trees in the ground and help with our carbon footprint just a little bit. So I was just wondering, like, if a brand new person came to you for advice, which they do, what do you tell them? Like, what are some of the things they need to think about before they say even buy land?
Okay. The very first thing they need to do is if they don't have land, they need to find a place that they know is suited to chestnuts. Or if they already have land, find out if their site is suited to chestnuts before they start thumbing through nursery catalogs looking for stuff to plant. Because they won't grow just anywhere. They're a bit on the picky side when it comes to the kind of site they grow on. So that's step number one. If they find out they do have a site, then they can start planting trees. And then there's two things. Once the big hurdle is out of the way, once they have a site, there's two things to keep in mind. One is they have to have protection from competition, from weeds. And if you don't have effective protection from competition, the trees are not going to grow and thrive. Most will die, and the ones that don't die won't grow. They also need protection from animals, and it has to be effective protection from animals, especially from deer and rabbits, but also mice and gophers, and sometimes newly planted trees get dug up by raccoons.
Sure.
And whatever you do, you have to have protection from animals. But if you do those two things and have a good quality stock planted on a good site, properly planted and properly protected, there's no reason not to be very successful.
That's great. That's encouraging coming from someone with so much success.
And I've killed a lot of trees over the years by not doing some of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we've learned the hard way on a few things. If you were to start over again, what would you do differently?
Well, just by happy accident, I had a really good site for chestnuts. I didn't know it when I started planting them there.
Yeah.
Though I didn't know how important site selection was. But in the beginning, I didn't do a good enough job at weed control and didn't do a good enough job at animal protection. But for a couple of things, some of the technology that's available today for weed control and animal protection just didn't exist back then, or they were prohibitively expensive back then. But yeah, I would go back and do a better job at weed control and animal protection.
Okay. And so do you have fencing around your?
No, I don't.
Okay. Yeah.
I depend on you pick customers chasing the deer away, because most of the nuts fall during the day. I'd say at least 75% of the nuts fall between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m.
And you've seen that trend over
And we try and, yes, and we try and have customers out picking at that time of the year or that time of the day, and they keep the deer chased into the woods.
Perfect.
As soon as the last customer leaves, the deer come out and start looking to see if there are any nuts that got missed, and sometimes there are some, but we try and have them all picked up by sunset, so there's nothing left for the deer to get.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any fencing in place. We may at some point, we're not sure, but I heard it's especially important if you're using harvesting equipment.
Yeah, our harvesting equipment is customers.
Yep.
So
it does. So it's yeah.
So
and I know a lot of growers don't have the fencing. There's like a couple different views on it, like everything in this industry.
Yeah, and the fencing can be extremely expensive, and even a really good deer fence won't necessarily stop a highly motivated deer.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a man here at this conference who put up an 8-foot high fence all around his 250-acre farm, and he still has deer getting through.
That'll make you upset. One more question. We kind of talked about it, but people are asking us frequently about what kind of chestnut tree should we plant. No, we talked about grafted versus seedlings, but do you have a perspective on?
Yeah, well, don't plant grafted trees. Grafted trees are good for producing good seedlings, but what you want to plant for nut production are good seedlings. Mm-hmm. Of course, good seedlings usually have to come from grafted trees, but so plant grafted trees only for seed production, not for nut production. And it's constantly changing, but recommended varieties to serve as the seed source for your seedling trees varies. But in our area, my top choices, cultivar varieties of chestnut that have proven to produce good seedlings, good productive seedlings, include Ching, Peach, Gideon, Mossbarger, Uval's Monster, and Auburn Super.
All good trees.
Yes, okay. Those all have a track record of producing good seedlings. It's more important that the tree produce good seedlings than to be a good producer itself. But there are varieties out there that are really good grafted trees and produce nice nuts, but tend not to produce as high a proportion of good seedlings.
Okay.
And I don't recommend those. Yes.
So much to learn, Well, I totally appreciate your time and sharing just a few moments of your wisdom. And for anyone that's listening to this or reading this, feel free to call you, right, Tom?
Okay.
What's your information for them? Contact you.
I guess they can call at 319-729-5905 or email tom@redfernfarm.com.
Awesome.
Oh, and I wasn't quite finished talking about spacing.
Yes, we're going to revisit spacing.
Okay.
And this is the bonus section here.
Yeah. So I mentioned to you that I recommended 20 by 20 spacing and then thinning to 40 by 40, then 80 by 80, then 160 by 160. I attended a chestnut growers conference about 15 years ago where several speakers got up and talked about how 20 by 20 spacing was wrong and that the correct spacing was, and then they gave their spacing, which was something else, usually wider than 20 by 20. So I think one guy said 30 by 30, another said 20 by 40, and one said 40 by 40. And then the fourth speaker got up, and it was a woman from the People's Republic of China, and she gave their spacing in meters, of course, and the spacing they were doing was 1 by 1.7, I think. And it came to something like 3 feet by 7 feet. And at that spacing, they were getting 9,000 pounds per acre, which is more than twice anybody has ever reported in North America. And that was much tighter spacing than 20 by 20. Yeah. So the moral of the story is, I tell people, there's no right or wrong in spacing. The spacing is whatever your goals are, and whatever you want it to be, except for 20 by 20, which is the only right spacing.
Well, the important part is once they grow large enough and the crowns of the tree start to touch, that's
or just before they start to touch, you start thinning.
Taking them out.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. We've got to get back to the conference, and thank you so much again for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Branching Out, hosted by United Chestnuts. For information about chestnut trees and chestnuts, visit unitedchestnuts.com. Subscribe to the weekly blog and join the United Chestnuts community Facebook group. Let's grow together.